Welcome to the deep dive, where we go deep into research so you don't have to. Today we're going to be talking about this really cool paper from the European Journal of Radiology,
Oh, yeah.
all about AI and brain tumors.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it is. It's specifically about how scientists are using this clever, visual trick
Uh-huh.
to help AI tell the difference between glioblastomas and lymphomas.
Okay, yeah. That's a really important distinction to make because
Yeah.
they need like totally different treatments.
Right.
And as the paper points out,
Yeah.
even with all the advanced imaging we have,
hmm
those tumors can be super tricky to tell apart.
Yeah, for sure. So the stakes are high,
Yeah,
and that's where spectroscopy comes in.
right.
This technique is basically analyzing the chemical makeup of the tumor. Gives doctors unique fingerprint to work with.
Okay.
And traditionally, doctors have always just interpreted these visually.
Yeah. That's where the challenge comes in.
Okay.
When you try to bring AI into the picture. MR spectroscopy data is one-dimensional.
Okay.
It's just like a squiggly line on a graph,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't really AI's forte.
Gotcha.
AI algorithms, especially the ones that are trained to do image recognition,
Yep.
they thrive on those two-dimensional images.
So how do you bridge that gap?
Right.
Well, these researchers, they came up with this pretty ingenious solution.
Okay.
They took those one-dimensional spectra and they transformed them into images
Okay.
using something called a Gramian angular field, or GAF.
GAF. Okay.
Yeah.
What's so cool about that GAF is that it basically mimics how doctors visually interpret that MR spectroscopy data. So it maps the data onto this circular grid.
Well,
It calculates the relationships between the points.
okay.
And bam, you have this unique visual pattern that
Yeah.
represents the original spectrum.
So instead of that squiggly line, we have a visually distinct image,
Right.
which is way more AI friendly.
Exactly.
And the paper actually shows us this in action. Figure 4 shows a clear visual difference between the lymphoma and glioblastoma spectra.
So you can actually see the difference.
Yeah, you can see it.
Oh, wow.
You can clearly see this large lipid peak in the lymphoma spectra,
Mm-hmm.
while the glioblastoma spectra have a higher ratio of choline to creatinine.
Makes sense.
And when you transform those spectra using the GAF,
Uh-huh.
those differences just become even more apparent in the images.
Interesting.
Okay, so we've got these images.
Yeah.
Now, what do they do with them?
Well, they took these GAF images
Okay.
and they used them to train a convolutional neural network.
Oh,
ResNet 101 to be exact.
no. Okay, I was going to ask what kind.
Yeah.
So a ResNet 101.
Yep. And the beauty of using a pre-trained network like that
Ah.
is that it's already learned to recognize patterns
Okay.
from millions of other images.
So it's not starting from scratch?
Exactly. They're building on existing knowledge,
Interesting.
which makes the whole training process way more efficient.
That's awesome. And the results?
Yeah.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The AI actually achieved a higher accuracy
Wow.
when it was trained on the raw, unprocessed data
Really?
compared to the cleaned-up processed data.
Huh. That's a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
You'd think that processed data would lead to better results,
Yeah, for sure.
but it seems like the raw data might contain subtle information
Okay.
that gets lost during the processing.
Interesting.
Like maybe tiny little variations in the signal that get smoothed out.
Huh.
It really highlights how much we still don't know
Yeah.
about how AI interacts with this data.
So they fed the AI all this information.
Yeah.
And it actually worked.
It's pretty cool.
Did it actually manage to differentiate between glioblastoma and lymphoma?
Well, we have to remember that this was just a feasibility study.
Right.
So they were really just testing if this approach was even possible.
Right.
But with a pretty small data set, they actually got some promising results.
Okay.
The AI correctly classified glioblastoma versus lymphoma with an accuracy of 73.7%.
Using the raw data.
Yeah, using the raw data.
That's pretty good.
Not bad at all, considering the challenges that they were up against.
And it's not just about overall accuracy, right?
Definitely not.
In this case, we're talking about potentially life-saving surgery.
Absolutely.
So how did the AI do on things like sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
and avoiding those false negatives?
Absolutely.
Those cases where you absolutely do not want to miss a glioblastoma.
Well, it actually performed well on those metrics, too.
Okay.
The sensitivity was 92%,
Wow.
meaning it correctly identified the vast majority of glioblastomas,
Okay.
and the false negative rate was only 8%.
That's awesome.
So it missed very few cases.
That's really encouraging. So this approach shows some real promise.
Yeah, definitely.
But every study has its limitations, right?
Of course.
What were some of the caveats that they mentioned?
Well, one of the biggest challenges they had was limited data,
Okay.
especially for the lymphoma cases.
Hmm.
Lymphoma is less common than glioblastoma,
Right.
so they just had fewer examples for the AI to learn from. They
I
tried
see.
to address this with downsampling,
Okay.
but ideally a larger, more balanced data set would be needed.
So it's like trying to teach someone about birds, but all they ever see are pigeons.
Uh-huh.
You think they'd know an eagle when they saw one?
Probably not.
Yeah.
They'd probably call everything with feathers a pigeon
Right.
to really get this right.
Yeah.
They need to see a much wider variety of birds.
Makes sense. So more data would be helpful.
Definitely.
What other limitations do they highlight?
Another limitation was that they only used single voxel spectroscopy,
Okay.
which means they were only analyzing like a tiny specific region of the tumor.
Gotcha.
Think of it like judging an entire pizza based on one bite.
Okay.
You might get lucky,
Yeah.
but you also might just get a mouthful of crust.
I like crust, though.
Yeah, crust is good.
So how do we get a bigger slice of this pizza?
That's where multivoxel spectroscopy or even whole brain 3D MRSI come in.
Okay.
These techniques can capture a much more complete picture of the tumor's metabolic activity.
So you're saying instead of one bite, we can see the whole pie?
Exactly. Imagine being able to see not just one bite, but the entire pizza
Yeah.
with all the toppings,
Oh, man.
variations in the crust.
Now I'm really hungry.
That's the level of detail we're talking about.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing.
So with more data and better techniques for acquiring that data,
Right.
what other advancements can we expect to see in AI-powered brain tumor diagnosis?
Well, remember, MR spectroscopy is just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
We have so much more information that can help us paint a clearer picture.
Like what? Give us the rundown.
Okay, well, we have patient demographics like
Mm.
age and sex and medical history.
Right.
We have other imaging findings from CT scans or traditional MRI.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we have the clinical presentation, the symptoms that the patient is experiencing.
So ideally, we want an AI model that can look at all of this information holistically.
Exactly.
It would be like having a superpowered diagnostic tool
Yeah.
that considers everything from the patient's age to the subtle chemical shifts in their brain tissue.
That's the goal.
Wow.
And that's where the real power of AI lies.
Yeah.
It has the potential to synthesize these vast amounts of information from different sources
Okay.
and identify patterns that we as humans might miss.
Right.
Patterns that could lead to earlier and more accurate diagnoses.
This is all incredibly exciting.
It is.
It feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution
Yeah,
in how we diagnose and treat brain tumors.
I agree.
But before we get too carried away,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to this specific research.
Okay.
What were the key takeaways?
For me, the biggest takeaway is the potential of GAF,
Okay.
the Gramian angular field.
The GAF.
Yeah, it's such an elegant way to translate this complex one-dimensional data
Right.
into something that AI can actually understand. I think we'll see it applied to all sorts of medical imaging analyses.
I totally agree. It's like we've unlocked a secret code that allows AI to see those subtle chemical conversations that are happening inside our bodies.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's not forget about the human element in all of this.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's like we've given AI a new language to work with,
Yeah.
one that speaks in chemical shifts and spectral patterns.
It's true. But it's important to remember that AI is still a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, its effectiveness depends on the skill of the user.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We're not talking about replacing doctors with robots anytime soon.
No, not at all.
The goal is to enhance human expertise, not eliminate it.
Exactly.
AI can help doctors make more informed decisions,
Right.
but ultimately it's the doctor who uses their judgment and their experience to determine the best course of treatment for each individual patient.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's powerful collaboration.
It is.
Doctors with their clinical knowledge and experience, and AI experts who can unlock those hidden patterns within complex data.
It's a partnership that holds so much potential for the future of medicine.
We've talked about how this GAF technique could be applied to other types of medical data, even venturing beyond the realm of medicine.
Right.
But here's something I've been pondering.
Okay.
What if we could use this approach to visualize and analyze abstract concepts that don't have a physical form,
No, that's a fascinating thought.
taking something intangible and making it tangible?
I like it.
Could we use GAF to create visual representations of emotions
Okay.
or thoughts or ideas?
Interesting.
Could we train AI to recognize patterns in these abstract landscapes?
It's a question that really pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder about the limits of AI
Uh-huh.
and what we can actually measure and
It
analyze.
really does.
And it definitely opens up some intriguing philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge and understanding.
And with that thought-provoking question, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating research with you.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and keep diving deep. Okay, I am getting hungry just thinking about that pizza analogy.
Yeah, me too.
But back to the research. They obviously couldn't capture the whole pizza with this study,
Right.
but they did point to some exciting future directions.
Yeah.
They mentioned something called multi-center studies.
Yeah.
Can you explain what those are
Mm-hmm.
and why they're so important in this field?
Sure. Multi-center studies basically involve collecting data from multiple hospitals
Okay.
or research institutions.
Gotcha.
And it's super crucial in a field like this
Yeah.
because it lets you gather a much larger and more diverse data set.
Right.
Remember, the more varied the data that the AI is trained on, the better it's going to perform out there in the real world.
But those multi-center studies can be tricky,
It
right?
can be.
Especially with this MR spectroscopy data.
Yeah.
Different scanners, different protocols, different ways of processing the data.
Uh-huh.
It seems like a logistical nightmare.
It definitely can be. It's like trying to combine ingredients from different kitchens, each with their own unique set of spices and cooking styles.
Right.
It can be really tough to standardize everything.
So is it even possible?
Well, that's where this fascinating approach called federated learning comes in.
Federated learning.
Yeah,
That sounds intriguing.
it is pretty cool.
What is that all about?
So imagine each hospital has its own set of MR spectroscopy data.
Okay.
Instead of trying to physically gather all that data in one place,
Right.
which is often impossible because of privacy concerns and just logistical hurdles,
Yeah, that makes sense.
you can actually train separate AI models at each location
Okay.
using their local data.
So we've got all these little AI chefs learning their own recipes in their own kitchens.
Exactly. Then what? Then they share their recipes
Okay.
without actually sharing the ingredients.
So they're not giving up any private patient information.
Exactly. It's kind of like whispering secrets about the best cooking techniques.
I like that.
The models, they share their learned knowledge
Uh-huh.
or model weights
Right.
without actually revealing that underlying patient data.
So they're pooling their knowledge without compromising anyone's privacy.
Exactly. That's amazing.
It is a pretty cool approach.
Federated learning is definitely something I need to deep dive into later.
Yeah, it's worth looking into.
But shifting back to this specific research,
Yeah.
we talked about the single voxel spectroscopy
Right.
and the need for a bigger slice of pizza.
The whole pie.
Yeah. What are the implications of using multivoxel spectroscopy or whole brain 3D MRSI for AI analysis?
Well, moving to multivoxel or whole brain 3D MRSI would be a total game changer.
How so?
It would allow us to capture a much richer data set,
Right?
giving the AI a way more complete view of the tumor's metabolic landscape.
So instead of just seeing pepperoni, we can see all the toppings. Exactly. Imagine being able to see not just one bite,
Mm-hmm.
but the entire pizza with
Mhm.
all its toppings
Right.
and the variations in the crust.
That's a lot of data.
It is. That's
Yeah.
the level of detail we're talking about.
Wow.
Pretty amazing, right?
So with more data, better techniques for acquiring that data,
Uh-huh.
what other advancements can we expect to see in AI-powered brain tumor diagnosis?
Well, it's important to remember that MR spectroscopy is just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
We have so much more information that can help us paint a clearer picture.
Like what? Give us the rundown.
Right. Well, we have patient demographics,
Uh-huh.
things like age, sex, and medical history.
Okay.
We have other imaging findings from CT scans or traditional MRI.
Yeah.
And of course, we have the clinical presentation, the
Yeah.
symptoms that the patient is actually experiencing.
So ideally, we want an AI model that can look at all of this information holistically.
Exactly.
Like it would be like having a superpowered diagnostic tool
A super tool.
that considers every
Uh-huh.
from the patient's age
Mm-hmm.
to the subtle chemical shifts in their brain tissue.
That's the dream.
Wow.
And that's where the true power of AI really lies.
Yeah.
It can synthesize these vast amounts of information from all these different sources
Right.
and identify patterns that we might miss as humans.
That could be huge.
It could lead to earlier and more accurate diagnoses.
This is all incredibly exciting. It feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution
It does feel that way.
in how we diagnose and treat brain tumors.
Hey.
But before we get too carried away,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to this specific research.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways here?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is the potential of GAF,
Okay.
the Gramian angular field.
Right.
It's just such an elegant way to translate this complex one-dimensional data
Yeah.
into something that AI can understand.
It's like a Rosetta Stone for AI.
Exactly.
Right.
I think we're going to see it applied in all sorts of medical imaging analysis in the future.
I totally agree. It's
Yeah.
like we've unlocked this secret code that allows AI to see the subtle chemical conversations happening inside our bodies.
It's a beautiful way to put it.
But let's not forget about the human element in all of this. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like we've given AI this new language, one that speaks in chemical shifts and spectral patterns.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that AI is still just a tool.
Yeah.
And like any tool,
Yeah.
its effectiveness really depends on the skill of the user.
That's a good point. We're not talking about replacing doctors with robots anytime soon, right?
No, not at all.
Hmm.
The goal is to enhance that human expertise,
Man.
not eliminate it completely.
Right. AI can help doctors, make more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, it's the doctor who uses their judgment and experience
Right.
to figure out the best treatment for each patient.
It's a collaboration.
Yeah, it's a powerful collaboration.
It is.
You have doctors with all their clinical knowledge and experience
Yeah.
and AI experts who can unlock these hidden patterns in this complex data.
It's a partnership that holds so much potential for the future of medicine.
We've talked about how this GAF technique could be applied to other types of medical data,
Right.
even venturing beyond the realm of medicine.
Yeah, beyond medicine.
But here's something I've been thinking about.
Okay.
What if we could use this approach to visualize and analyze abstract concepts
Interesting.
that don't have a physical form,
That's a fascinating thought.
like taking something intangible and making it tangible?
I like it.
Could we use GAF to create visual representations of emotions or thoughts or ideas? Could we train AI to recognize patterns in these abstract landscapes?
It's a really interesting question. It makes you wonder about the limits of AI
Yeah,
and what we can actually measure and analyze.
it really does.
And it raises some pretty big philosophical questions, too.
It does. It makes you think about the nature of knowledge and understanding.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this research with you.
Always a pleasure. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and keep diving deep.